I'm going to turn now and talk about this Flynn case and the kind of the fallout of it all. And I've called this the left's fury and the GOP's flop. You know, we talked about, I think last Thursday in the show, we talked about the kind of information that is now finally available because of the incredible determination and relentless insistence by the attorney for Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, at not giving in, not surrendering. I'm going to get to the truth, keeps filing motions, keeps pushing. She finally got the documents released. And again, to be clear, do not for a moment delude yourselves that these high-level people inside the DOJ and FBI suddenly found virtue, suddenly found integrity, and finally released things that they should have released months ago. The things that were released by the FBI that led to the dropping of all the charges against Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, those are documents they had all along. And no one inside the DOJ found the integrity, the internal, I got to do the right thing, and turn them over. They were turned over because Attorney General Barr brought in a special U.S. attorney to review the documents. This is a guy, Jensen, and said, you know what, who's from Missouri, U.S. Attorney Jensen, who reviewed all these documents and said to the FBI, you have to turn these over. You can't just hide them here. And so when they were turned over, you know, all you can say freedom broke loose, all liberty broke loose in Washington, because what we all learned was what Attorney General, what we learned from, it was from Sidney Powell, what she'd been saying, from Lieutenant General Michael Flynn had been saying, he was innocent. You found the things that Sidney Powell's been saying to be proven by the documents they finally were forced to produce, not due to integrity, but due to Jensen being hired by Attorney General Barr to come in, review the documents and say, dang, this is what they really had all along. I'll remind you, those documents included the statements on the handwritten notes on the side of the entire a meeting related to Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, in which the Assistant Director of Counterintelligence, Priestap, I think it's Bill Priestap, had written notes on the side. What is our goal? Truth / admission, or to get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired? And then he goes on talking about that they're playing games, acknowledging that they're playing games. There also was discovery that came out that showed that the attorney, Lisa Page, was playing games with the idea of, when do we have to let him know, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, know that actually he's under investigation? She was trying to say, can we kind of slip in the beginning, kind of a general, hey, by the way, you realize if anything you say is not honest, you can be prosecuted. She was trying to set up the entire interview of Flynn to make it so that Flynn felt comfortable. We finally have President Trump as president. Flynn is his national security advisor. He feels like he's dealing with the Trump administration, the Trump DOJ. He's friendly, answering questions, and not given the transcript of the recorded conversation that he made, and not notified at the start that you are a target of investigation. So you had, plain as day, in handwritten notes by the Assistant Director of Counterintelligence, Priestap, acknowledging that the FBI was setting up Michael Flynn. This is the only reason that the court is going to be forced to dismiss all the charges against Michael Flynn, because the DOJ in their own handwriting, the DOJ's office in their own handwriting, put down, we're kind of playing games. Now, some people are hypothecating that maybe Priestap wasn't part of the conspiracy. Maybe he was writing notes down, kind of questioning what he's hearing. He's sitting around listening to Page and Strzok and others and thinking, this doesn't really sound right. I'm kind of questioning what they're doing. I'm going to write down my little notes here. What's our goal? He may actually have been innocent and kind of shocked by what he was hearing. That's in the realm of possible. But anyway, this is what we got. And so then I'm turning to my left's fury. Let me just read you some of the beyond idiotic statements from the American left in response to this announcement that the DOJ is dropping charges against Flynn. Let me start with, by the way, going back to what you heard President Obama say. You heard President Obama in a secretly released, he actually wants everyone to see it. That's why he released it. But You have Obama saying this is unprecedented. You know, we can go into all sorts of danger in this country, the loss of the rule of law. You know, I can't believe a guy who's pled guilty to perjury. It's just going to be a lot. No one had a chance in that conversation, because he's just, you know, blathering on the phone to supporters, to say, how do you account for what Priestap wrote? How do you account for what Lisa Page said? How do you account for all of the evidence we now have that they set up this guy? You have Obama just doing the Democrat talking points, do the protect my legacy talking points, do the protect the possibility my wife can be president someday talking points. These are the kind of things that motivate Obama. But others are involved. For example, Representative Nadler, you know, the Democrat representative in Congress, chair of the Judiciary Committee, and he is beside himself, says he, that the Department of Justice would drop charges against Flynn. Again, so he spews and sputters and puts out tweets. You know, he's rest assured we're going to get to reschedule this hearing. It's an outrage. And he puts Flynn, and then in all caps, which in tweets is supposed to symbolize you're yelling, Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to investigators. The evidence against him is overwhelming. Now a politicized DOJ is dropping the case. The decision to overrule the special counsel is without precedent and warrants an immediate explanation. Other people on the Democrat side, Elizabeth Warren, she who would have been president, calling for Attorney General Barr to step down. People, this is one of the points I try to talk about in the show. We lose sight of the idea that truth exists. Warren, Senator Warren, Nadler, all these leftists complaining that the DOJ essentially caught with his hands in the cookie jar, caught handwriting, gee, we're playing games, we're screwing around with this guy, we're setting him up, we're entrapping him, we're framing him. In their own words, they're writing these kinds of things. And the Democrats are complaining, how dare they let this guy off just because he was being set up? That's ridiculous. And I want to get it and encourage you to understand, we have to start saying truth exists, Nadler. There's not going to be one media person in Washington who will ever say to Nadler, well, how do you account for the notes that Bill Priestap wrote right on the FBI documents? How do you account for the emails between Page and Strzok in which she's slimily trying to set up a way to give the warning they're supposed to give without having Lieutenant General Michael Flynn realize it's a warning? I mean, no one ever asks these people. They get to spew and spout and act like they're so indignant, and it's just beyond the pale. This guy should possibly get off. With their own allies in the DOJ set up Flynn, and they're upset because somebody finally figured it out and finally said, hey, you know what? This isn't right. We don't do this in this country. Nadler, among others, having a meltdown. But I want to turn the other kind of name I gave this segment is the GOP's flop. I just want to say this about this. It is true that since 2018, the Democrats have had majority control of the House. So any hearing, any witnesses, the Dems had control of everything, as we saw during the completely ridiculous, baseless, without any reason at all, zero evidence impeachment effort against President Trump. But the Republicans, because they don't have control of the House, can't really do the things they want to do once the Democrats got control. They won the 2018 midterms, got control of the House. But the Republicans had the majority in the House the first 2 years of the Trump administration, which leads me to a clip I want to ask you to listen to. This is Matt Gaetz. He's a Republican congressman from Florida, and he's talking about all this that we've been talking about, but he's pointing out something about the GOP that I want to make the point after you hear what Matt Gaetz had to say about what did we do when we had power, what did we do?
Devin Nunes is a patriot, and I'm glad you went through Trey Gowdy's exquisite questions in 2017 to these corrupt officials. I guess my question, Sean, would be, why was it then in late May of 2018 that Trey Gowdy went on Martha McCallum's show and said that the FBI did exactly what all of our fellow Americans would have wanted them to do, and that it had nothing to do with Donald Trump? Both of those things have now been proven to be not true, and it seems that Gowdy's brilliant lawyering back in 2017 that we're only able able to see now proves those two statements untrue. The number one question I get asked from Americans is why no one has gone to jail and been held accountable. Unfortunately, when Nunes and Meadows and Jordan and I wanted subpoena power, it was Paul Ryan and Trey Gowdy that wouldn't give us that subpoena power. Democrats sent out hundreds of subpoenas when we had control and could have run this to ground in 2017. We didn't send out a single subpoena, not one, and that's a failure of our Republican leadership.
Okay, that's a nice way of saying it. That's a failure of the Republican leadership. He mentions two people, Paul Ryan and Trey Gowdy. And I want to focus on Paul Ryan right now. Paul Ryan, at the time all of what you were just hearing was transpiring, we, the Republican side, had the majority in the U.S. House. Paul Ryan was majority leader. He, of anyone, if you wanted to have the power, you wanted the power to be used, you wanted to have the Republicans come forward and be strong and come to the defense of President Trump, you would have issued subpoenas. You would have, for those 2 years in there, 17 and 18, before the Democrats won control, Republicans could have issued mountains of subpoenas. They could have gotten to the bottom of this during the time the Republicans had the majority. And you can say, okay, maybe Paul Ryan is just a big institutional guy, and he did not want to call into question the integrity of the Department of Justice. He didn't want to call into question the integrity of the FBI or the CIA or the NSA. Maybe all of those institutions in Washington, which it now turns out were complicit in the effort to take down Trump. Maybe when you're Paul Ryan, you say that the damage institutionally to this country is too great, that if we start to issue subpoenas and call in people from these very prestigious, high level, highest law enforcement level of our country, people call them before the House, ask them what the heck is going on, what are you doing, what's happening with this, why are you going after this, why is this happening? That maybe you, as Paul Ryan, can excuse your decision not to do that because you're saying, look, I may be Speaker of the House, I may be Republican, but I stand for the whole of the U.S. government, and I want to stand strong with our government, and I don't want to damage the institutional reputation or integrity of all these organizations. Maybe he gets a pass for that. I don't think he does, because I don't think that even in that job, in that position, that you can overlook lawlessness and corruption at the level it was happening, evident even then, and say, well, but we still can't expose it because that might make everybody look bad, and we don't want to hurt the country, so that's bad. Maybe, though, if you're in the camp that says, okay, Paul Ryan, he's trying to be a defender of all, and he's trying not to upset the apple cart, but then why is Paul Ryan silent now? Why? He's not in government. He's a Fox board member. I mean, he has no reason to not be speaking up, screaming from the rooftops at this point, Paul Ryan, screwed up. I should never have allowed this to go on during the time where Republicans had the majority in the House, and we could have dived in, we could have dug in, we could have found all this out then. We could have spared the country the Mueller investigation. We could have spared the country all this garbage we've been through for 3 years. If you're Paul Ryan, you had that ability, and you decided not to at the time, but why is he silent now? Why? It is inexcusable. It is and folks, some of my listeners, you maybe think Paul Ryan was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I've never liked him that much. I think he's squirmy. I think he is very best moderate. I think he was grooming himself for a potential future run for president. I think that he thought it was unseemly to get down in the mud, to get down and fight against the radical left in this country that was trying to destroy President Trump. I think President Trump's audaciousness, his, he's just the bulldog in the china shop. He is going to speak up, and he's going to say what's true, and he's not going to relent. And he was willing to do, President Trump, willing to do major shifts in policy in this country, major righting of the ship in this country, major getting us steering away from the iceberg, getting us back on course as a country rooted in freedom. That's what President Trump ran on. That's what he did. And that kind of solid, rock solid, pro-America, pro-Constitution, pro-strong America, that doesn't sit well with the cocktail set in Washington. It doesn't sit well with the people who want to pretend that in Washington it's filled with Democrats and Republicans and we're all just one big happy family and we have policy disputes and we see who wins the most votes and we make policies and we move forward. That insidious and idiotic vision of what's happening in Washington. But people like to think and pretend that's what's happening in Washington, that we really just have two political parties and, you know, we have differences, but we rock and roll forward, we solve our problems. America has been watching and our eyes were opened during the 8 years of the Obama administration, and with some of us who simply live and breathe politics longer than that, with the idea that the left in this country is radically left. The Democrat Party, even though most of them don't put socialist next to their name, most of their candidates and elected officials, their policies are socialist, their policies are radical, and socialists and leftists and radicals and Marxists and collectivists, they always function the same way. They push and push and push and push to get more power. And anything that has to be done to get that power is always okay with them. The ends always justify the means. And so it's a facade, it's a pretend in Washington that we have a Democrat Party that is really part of the whole American dream, the whole American vision of the founding of America and the rights of individuals to live in freedom and the right to have a free market and a free economy. And people to live in freedom and not have a collectivist Marxist government in Washington grabbing power away. Americans are awake to the fact that that Democrat Party is long gone. Paul Ryan should have been awake to the idea that the radical left has taken over the Democrat Party. He should have been willing to get down in the mud and fight. He should have been willing back then to say, we're going to dig in at every level we see wrongdoing, everything they're doing, cooking up this garbage against President Trump, cooking up this Trump-Russia collusion, all of it coming out of the left and the left's determination to try to find something to sully President Trump. And Paul Ryan decided it was more important to save the institutions in his worldview, which are now, by the way, sullied and ruined. FBI, DOJ, NSA, CIA, they all need a massive cleaning out, and America can see this now. Paul Ryan thought it was safer to be a party guy, to be the guy who's still invited to all the cocktail parties and still understands both sides and still doesn't really want to be rattling things, because after all, President Trump, he's kind of unseemly. He doesn't behave like the rest of the the senatorial decorum crowd that they think they're so above everybody else. Paul Ryan was a coward. He didn't lead, he didn't fight, and he let this just egregious, unjustified attack against President Trump roll and roll and roll along. It is finally time. And Trey Gowdy, I have to get to him another day because I'm almost out of time, but Trey Gowdy's not much better. Fiery in his cross-examining, I'll give him that. He is really smart. But we have many people we talk about in this show. You can do all the fiery cross-examining and insightful questions and incisive summary of facts, and you're blasting people in the Benghazi hearings. But nothing comes of it. So you just kind of got your airtime and showed everybody how really smart you are at asking really, really tough questions, but nothing comes of it. It is time in this country to fight for what America stands for. That's why Trump won. That's why the left came after him, because Trump does stand for what America is. And this is why the American people are now so relieved, and they feel like we're finally going to get truth coming out of Washington, coming out about this complete destruction of integrity inside the FBI and DOJ and CIA and NSA. All of it's coming out, and that's the only way, my friends, we can restore America.